The Hobbit. Part 2. They are brought before the Elf Lord, and he orders that they be imprisoned. Bilbo is free, but he must remain hidden with the ring. Bilbo learns that Thorin is also imprisoned with them. Bilbo is unsure what to do and afraid that he would get captured. After many days trapped in the elven house, Bilbo learns that there is a stream that runs under it and barrels of wine are dropped through a portcullis to be returned to Lake Town. Bilbo comes up with a plan. When the captain of the guard and the butler get drunk, Bilbo steals the key. Bilbo quickly releases all of the dwarves and explains his plan to them. The dwarves do not like the plan at all, though in the end they go along with it. Bilbo takes the dwarves down to the cellars and puts them all in barrels that are to be dropped into the river to return to Lake Town. The elf servants soon drop the barrels down the portcullis. Bilbo is not in a barrel and must float down the river hanging onto one of the barrels. Eventually they make it down the river and are gathered up by a village of elves that lash the barrels together and begin hauling them to Lake Town. A town of men. The dwarves are upset and miserable once they are finally freed from the barrels. The dwarves meet the men of Lake Town and are brought before their leader. Thorin proclaims himself to be the king under the mountain. The townspeople begin to celebrate because they are excited for the gold that the king's return to the mountain could bring. The dwarves are given a house and food, and they begin to recover from their long weary journey. Eventually, they must head out, for they do intend to reclaim the lonely mountain. When they make it to the other side of the long lake, they are provided with homes and supplies for their journey to the lonely mountain. They come upon the desolation of Smaug, where there is very little that lives besides dry grass. When they reach the mountain, they head to the western side and begin looking for a path to the secret door. Bilbo ends up finding a track that leads them to the door. Unfortunately, even though they have found the door, they cannot open it. After many days of trying, they have almost given up hope until in the moonlight cracks appear in the wall and they are able to open the door. The dwarves send Bilbo into the mountain. As Bilbo descends into the mountain, it becomes hotter and hotter and he sees light ahead of him. In a vast chamber, Bilbo finds the massive dragon Smaug asleep on a bed of gold and jewels. Bilbo steals one golden cup and returns to the dwarves, but unfortunately dragons know their gold hoard down to the ounce and Smaug is alerted. The dwarves quickly re-enter the door before Smaug can find them. The dragon burns the mountain in an effort to flush the thieves out. When Smaug sees the ponies, he takes after them. The next day Bilbo decides to return to the dragon's chamber to see what he can find out. Unfortunately, he is immediately discovered by the dragon's sense of smell, but the dragon cannot find him because Bilbo has the ring on. The two end up having a long conversation where Bilbo flatters the dragon and confuses him with riddle talk. Eventually Bilbo tricks the dragon into showing his belly, where Bilbo can plainly see a weakness in his scales. Bilbo returns to the dwarves, and they discuss what he had discovered down in the chamber while a thrush listens. The thrush is an old magical bird from the time when the dwarves still lived in the mountain. Bilbo demands that they shut the door, and as they do, Smaug attacks and collapses the tunnel behind them. Smaug flies away to Lake Town. The dwarves go down to examine the treasure and Bilbo happens to find the Arkenstone, which Thorin desperately wants, though Bilbo keeps it to himself. Thorin presents Bilbo with a mithril shirt. The dwarves make their way out of the mountain to the abandoned city of Dale. They are fearful, but there seems to be no sign of Smaug. 2 days earlier Smaug attacks Lake Town with fire. The men douse their wooden houses in water and fire arrows at the dragon, but it does little good. A man named Bard, who is descended from the men of Dale, takes up his bow. Bard had almost used up all of his arrows when a thrush lands on his shoulder and tells him of the dragon's weakness. Bard makes a mighty shot that strikes the dragon's weakness perfectly, and the dragon falls to the lake below, where steam boils and the dragon's fire is put out. The people want to make Bard the king, but the master of Lake Town disputes this and says that Bard should be the king of Dale and not of Lake Town. The master incites to people to go to the mountain and demand recompense for the destruction of Lake Town from the dwarves. Bard decides to lead the people to the mountain and asks for aid from the wood elves of Mirkwood. The elves and the men join forces. Further away, the goblins and the wargs hear that the mountain is unguarded. A crow tells the dwarves of Smaug's death and the people's intent to take gold from the mountain. Thorin decides to prepare to fight off any who would come. He asks the crow to send a message to his cousin in the Iron Hills. The people of Lake Town and the elves of Mirkwood arrive at the lonely mountain and demand a share of the gold, but Thorin guards the gold greedily. The men and elves decide to besiege the mountain until some sense comes into Thorin. The greed of the dwarves does not sit well with Bilbo, so he takes the Arkenstone and leaves the mountain. He makes his way to the camp and meets with the Elven Lord and Bard. He warns them about the force of dwarves coming from the Iron Hills and gives them the Arkenstone as a bargaining chip. Bilbo returns to the mountain, but not before discovering that Gandalf is back. The next day, Bard bargains with the Arkenstone for a share of the treasure, but this angers Thorin greatly and he demands they tell how they got the Arkenstone. Bilbo offers that it was himself who gave them the Arkenstone. This angers Thorin even more, but in the end, he agrees to give a 1/14 share of the gold and silver and exiles Bilbo from the mountain. The next day, dwarves from the Iron Hills arrive. They intend to defend the mountain from the siege, and it would be very likely that if they do, Thorin could completely defend his treasure and possibly recapture the Arkenstone. The dwarves are about to force their way through the armies of men and elves, but just as they are, a great storm wails up and Gandalf proclaims that the armies of goblins and wargs have arrived unbeknownst to any of the armies. The armies must band together to fight a battle that would later be known as the Battle of Five Armies. The armies fight hard, and to everyone's surprise, even Thorin and the other dwarves join the battle, but they are too few and the fight becomes desperate. Until they see in the sky the eagles are coming. Unfortunately, Bilbo is struck in the head by a stone and does not see the conclusion of the battle, but when he wakes it seems that the battle is over and that the goblins are defeated. Bilbo was found and quickly taken to Thorin, who is dying. They have some last words and Bilbo mourns greatly when Thorin dies. Thorin's cousin Dain is made king under the mountain, and he splits the treasure more fairly and honors the agreement to give the people of Lake Town a 14th share for the Arkenstone. He offers Bilbo a great share of the treasure, but Bilbo only takes 2 small chests. It is time for Bilbo to return home. Bilbo and Gandalf go with the host of elves but turn and take the long route home rather than enter Mirkwood. They continue on and stay with Beorn for the winter but continue in the spring. Eventually they arrive in Rivendell and stay for a time. Further on their road home they come upon the trolls and Bilbo digs up the troll hoard. He offers it to Gandalf, but Gandalf insists that Bilbo should keep it. At long last the Shire comes into sight, but a bustle is going on around Bilbo's home. Bilbo finds out that an auction is occurring as most people think that he has died. They are quite surprised to find him alive. None more than the Sackville Bagginses, who were measuring the home to see if their own furniture would fit in it. Even after Bilbo appears, it is a long battle in order to get back all his things. Unfortunately, not all of it comes back to him. But the thing that is hurt the worst is his reputation. The hobbits believe him to have become strange on his journeys. Bilbo is not concerned, he is quite happy to have been there and back again.